Doug and I decided to do our research on learning styles and their relationship to multiple intelligences and how this relates to teaching styles and the modern classroom. We hope that you enjoy what we found and can hopefully use it in your future classroom. Learning styles have been given many different definitions, but I think a great general definition is an individual's mode of gaining knowledge, especially a preferred or best method. Additionally, an individual's unique approach to learning based on strengths, weaknesses, and preferences. We care about learning styles because modern research has showed how valuable that they can be if the teacher understands the uniqueness of each individual's strengths and weaknesses. I love these two quotes from two of the researchers that we did a lot of our researching from. And it says, when we share the profile of learning styles, as well as our own learning style information, the students see that not all individuals learn in the same way. I think this is great because from a student's perspective, they're always trying to associate themselves with their peers and with the teacher, and if they can see that they're unique and that that's okay, that it can bring a lot of interesting discussion to the table as people explore their personal strengths and then see how the combination of everybody's strengths can work together to build up the classroom and the total knowledge in the classroom from all the different viewpoints. Additionally, the second quote, knowledge of the student's particular learning style modes and preferences help us to respond to them by choosing explanatory or demonstrative approaches and materials tailored to their learning style preferences. So here is more from a teacher perspective, where our knowledge of how students learn affects how we bring the information to the table in the classroom. That if we know the profile of the students in this particular class at this particular time, we can find a way to tailor the information that we have into the way that they best receive it. We did our research in this section mainly from the article, a fantastic article called Using Learning Style Instruments to Enhance Student Learning. And in this article, two college professors, analyzed 5 of the main learning style models. And they compared and contrasted them, and basically they just presented them so that teachers reading it could see the layout of how each of these models brings a different element to the table in the topic of learning styles. So the first model is the Kolb learning style, which is the LSI indicator that they use a lot for K-12 analysis. And this is an experiential model, and we'll get into what each of these means in a minute. The second is the Gregoric style delineator, which is more phenomenological. And then you have, and the Gregoric is actually spurred from the Kolb learning model, that they took their model and developed out of that. The Felder-Silverman index of learning styles kind of combines the experiential, the phenomenological, and the sensory model. Then you have the BARC model, which is very well known. It's your visual, auditory, kinesthetic type of model, which is dealing with your sensory perceptions. And done and done productivity survey, which kind of combines elements of all the models and also includes how environmental and social and emotional stimuli can also affect an individual's ability to learn in the classroom. Okay, so first we have the Kolb learning theory, which defines learning as the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. So this is your experiential model, and by the processing of experience come 4 things. You have your concrete experience itself, the reflective observation, the conceptualization, and active experimentation. And it's kind of like a cycle that flows from the experience to the experimentation. And there are 4 kind of learning styles that result from this. You have your diverger, who is more interested in the concrete experience itself and what it means for their life. The assimilator, who is more interested about reflecting and conceptualizing about the information that they gleaned from that experience, so the facts and the knowledge and the information. They're your analyzers. Then you have the converger, who is abstract conceptualization and experimentation. So they want to know how it can be used. These are the concepts. how can I apply them to something practical? And then your accommodators, who are the experimenters, they're really the doers, that I learn best and I understand this information best by going out there and figuring it out and trying new things. This is kind of what it looks like, is that kind of continuum from the experience to the reflection to the abstract conceptualizing and the experimenting. And you can see that the researchers did a great job of kind of outlining what each of these parts entails. So as a teacher, you can see, concrete experience. Okay, this is where you've got, the examples and the films and the situations, the field work, and then the reflection is the brainstorming part of it, and we're, talking about that experience. And then conceptualizing comes where you take that reflection and apply it to something practical. And then experimentation, where you take that practical application and say, now how can I twist it and try something new and form a new experience based on this. And so your learners are going to fall into different categories of what they like to do along that. And hopefully, they kind of tinker with every single one of these so that they can get all these different experiences. Okay, so now we have the Gregoric learning theory, which defines learning styles as distinctive and observable behaviors that provide clues about the mediation abilities of individuals and how their minds relate to the world and, therefore, how they learn. So this is also like the Kolb model, that it's a four-pronged model. It kind of looks like a plus sign. It's got the concrete abstract continuum from top to bottom, and then the sequential random continuum from side to side. And again, 4 learning styles result from this. You have concrete sequential, abstract random, and concrete random. So here you can see it's very similar to the Kolb in how the diagram is laid out. You've got your concrete and abstract from top to bottom, just like the Kolb was, experience to thinking and about that experience. And then from side to side, this is where they differ. That the Kolb model kind of talked about the action versus the reflection, and this one it's about how you process the information. This is again very experience based. So you have sequential, who are the kind of detail by detail, step by step type of people, to your most random people who are the most global. They're going to be thinking about big picture and then bringing it down and figuring out the little pieces. And similar to the Kolb model, you've got your 4 quadrants, and on each tip of each quadrant, you have, in each corner of each quadrant, you have your learners who kind of compare and combine 2 of the points of the continuum. So, for example, in your top right quadrant, you have the concrete random, and that's going to be very similar to the accommodator type in the Kolb model, where you've got somebody that is taking the concrete and then thinking about it globally. They're going to be the doers and the experimenters. They're going to be exploring. They're going to be the visionaries. They're going to be the people that are taking the experience and then abstracting it and saying, okay, now how can I make a new experience out of this, or make it into something bigger. In the bottom right quadrant, you have your abstract random. These are going to be similar to your divergers of the previous model. So these are going to be the people that are taking that information and that experience and thinking about how it relates to their life and how it gives meaning to their life. So they're going to be people that are going to be relationally working to figure out those experiences and reflect on that meaning. And then you have your abstract sequential, which is like the converger. They're taking concepts and giving voice to how they can be applied. So they're thinking about them, and then they're sequencing them into a practical application of them. And then your sequential concrete are very similar to your assimilators. These are the people that are, the facts people. They're analyzers, their ideas. They want to know the reasons, the information. They're the people that are going to organize that information. They're going to take that experience and then they're going to sequence everything so that it's really well organized and defined into the details. Okay, so your VARC learning theory model is completely different from the other 2. It still defines learning styles as an individual's characteristics and preferred ways of gathering, organizing, and thinking about information. But in this model, it's more based on the sensory perception than it is on the experiential processing. So this is how your senses are taking information from the outside world and relating it to the inside. So in this, you also have kind of 4 separate quadrants. You've got your visual, your kinesthetic, your oral, and your reading and writing type of thing. And unlike the 4 quadrants from before, these are basically just separate categories as to which sense or senses you best use to analyze and take in information. So you've got really visual people who do really well with looking at diagrams and graphs, where they can see the information, then they can understand it. Or your oral people, the people that understand by talking about it or somebody explaining it to them verbally. These are your linguistic type of people that, the words themselves help communicate the information. Or your readers and your writers. These are the people that want to look at it on the page. They want to read about it and think about it on their own. They want to, kind of write it out, and they understand it by writing it and by applying it to the page. And then your kinesthetic people who have to do it. These are the people that they have to be involved in moving and talking and experimenting. These are very similar to the Kolb and Gregorc models of the very active doers and the accommodators. These are the people that got to get out there and try it themselves. Okay, the 4th model is the Felder-Silverman model. In this model, learning style is defined as the characteristic strengths and preferences in the ways individuals take in and process information. And their 4 learning style continuums are active reflective, very similar to the Kolb model, sensing and intuitive, visual verbal, and sequential global. So as you can see by this, there's kind of it takes the Kolb model and the Gregorc model, and it kind of takes them to the next level. So if you think about it, your active and reflective are very similar to the horizontal model in the Kolb, where you've got your action on one side and reflection on the other side. And in the Kolb, you had your experience on the top, and then thinking about that experience on the bottom. And so in a similar way, your sensing is kind of like your experience, the senses of how you're taking the outside world information in. And then the intuitive is how you're processing that information. Then it kind of takes it to the next level, and it says, okay, this is how we process the information. You've got visual people, and you've got verbal people, which is what we talked about with the VARC model. And then finally, sequential global, which is very similar to the Gregorc model, where you see, the people that are detail-oriented versus the people that are globally oriented, where you've got big concepts instead of tiny details. So as you can see, the active people are going to be, the ones that want to do hands-on stuff, they want to try stuff, and versus the reflective, who they kind of want to think about it, do it by themselves. Sensing people, this is dealing with the experience itself, the facts, the experiments, the details, versus the intuiting, which is, thinking about them and figuring out the theories and the ideas that can come from that information. Visual, again, got the charts and the diagrams, you like to look at it, versus the verbal, you like to talk about it. And then sequential, again, the reasoning, the step-by-step, versus that global synthesizing and connecting. The last model is the most comprehensive, and it's probably the hardest to implement in a classroom. The previous models kind of deal with, experience and how you kind of process experience, in a 4-step method, or how you take in an experience, based on your sensory dominance, this type of thing. This model deals a lot more with the stimulus around you. So you've got environmental, where sound affects how you learn, light affects how you learn, temperature affects how you learn. So some people need noise, some people need quiet, some people need it to be a really bright room to focus, or some people really like that dim, dim lighting that would put somebody else to sleep. Temperature, hot, cold, etc. Then you have an emotional. You've got your motivation, your responsibility, your structure, things personally that are affecting how you're able to connect with the information at hand. Thirdly, you've got sociological. So how you work best. Do you work best alone? Do you work best with a partner, or in a big group, or one-on-one with the teacher? How does that individual feel most comfortable accepting new information. And then physiological, which is very similar to the VARC model of learning intake, how people apply the learning through their senses, the mobility needs. Some people really need to be active in order to learn. Some people need to sit still because they can't concentrate on more than one thing. And then psychological processing, the sequential versus the global thinkers that we talked about in the previous models. So here again, you have your global versus analytic, big picture versus small picture. People that are, and then hemispheric dominance, people that are, left-brained and thinking about, logic and facts versus right-brained thinking about the actual experience and the sensing part of it. And then impulsive versus reflective. Again, your actors versus your reflectors. In this model, you can see there are so many different, factors that go into the learning process. And I think that, as an educator, you probably can't take into account or modify your teaching to do all of these things, but it's interesting to be aware of them, paying attention to what students like, who likes the quiet, who likes, the sound, who needs to be encouraged a lot, and who encourages themselves and please leave me alone type of thing. How they learn, in the evening or in the morning or in the afternoon, or if they like to move, they don't like to move. There's so many different factors, and I think this is a great chart for showing kind of different things. And if one method isn't working, if you're teaching a lot in a certain style or in a certain environment, maybe try switching up the environment and seeing if that makes a difference at all. Okay, so here we have a comparison of the 5 models, and we can see that they're kind of laid out into different categories of experience processing, sensory perception, and environmental, personal, and social stimuli. So the first 2 models, and then parts of the Felder, Silverman, and Dunn address the experience processing, how people absorb the information once they have already taken it in. So you've got your concrete, abstract, active, reflective, sequential, random, those type of processes, versus the sensory perception of how people learn by actually taking the information in. Do they learn best by seeing it, hearing it, writing it, or moving and experiencing it? And then the Dunn is the only one that addresses that last category, as we talked about, with the environmental, personal, and social stimulus. So the environment, the lighting and the temperature, and then the motivation that they have, whether they're encouraged or not encouraged, or they like to work alone or they like to work together, and adding those aspects to the learning theory models and asking the question, how do these also influence learning? All right, so now that we've talked about all 5 models and kind of compared them, I'd also like to show a little bit of the relationship between these models and the things that we've already talked about in class before Doug goes and talks about some of the implications for the models in other aspects. So I'd like to talk about them quickly in relation to format, hemispheric dominance, and the multiple intelligences theory. Okay, so their format connection. Format works really well with the Kolb model. If you compare the two, you've got experience at the top, abstracting experience, you're thinking about it at the bottom, and then on your other continuum is the action reflection. Again, your type 1 diverger in the Kolb model would be, in that experience reflection quadrant. So these are the people that are going to look for the meaning. They're going to be the imaginative ones, the relational ones, the creative ones. They're going to be ones that want to figure out what it means to them personally. They're going to be the ones asking the question, why? Your type 2, your assimilator in the Kolb model, are the people that are going to be looking for the facts, the details, analysis of the ideas and the reasoning. This is the what. They're going to be looking for the substance itself, the concepts. Type 3 converger are the people that are going to be trying to practically apply that knowledge. So they're going to be thinking about that experience and then saying, okay, how can I put it into action? What is the practical implication for this information that I've taken in? And so they're asking the question, how? And they're looking to apply it to skill sets. And then finally, type 4 is your accommodator. So again, these are the people that are going to be the doers and the explorers. These are the people that are looking to take that experience and action together and figure out a new level or a new idea from it. These are going to be your risk takers and the people that are trying to be the visionaries. And so you can see that that relates really well to the Kolb model, but at the same time it also relates really well to the Gregor model and the 4 quadrants that we talked about there as well. Okay, so I think that the important thing to realize in the relation to this format connection between the Kolb model and the format is that format is really useful in teaching and for showing us how we can connect concepts to learners, define content, and have definable outcomes. And so in relation to learning styles, then, the most important thing for the format connection is showing how these concepts can be related to the learners through these different, the quadrants and the awareness of the different quadrants and the different types of learners in the classroom. Who's looking for the meaning, who's looking for the content and the skill sets itself, who's looking for the how and the practical application, who's looking for the if and the how I can make something bigger out of this. And at the same time also trying to get people that function really well in 1 or 2 of these strengths to also see from the perspective of other students. And so that they can kind of start thinking in all of these quadrants as well as their preferential one. In relation to hemispheric dominance, you can see from the previous models a lot of similarity between what we've talked about between your left brain thinkers versus your right brain thinkers. And so I kind of wanted to compare them to show a little bit more definitively which qualities are functioning out of left brain dominance versus right brain dominance. So you can see in your left brain, we talked about how this is the linear, sequential, logical processing part of your brain. This is where you process language, and you process symbols, and you process the details and the analysis of the situation. So the implications for the learning styles then, the abstract and reflective thinkers of the Kolb model, the sequential people, the people that are going from detail to detail, the verbal, lingual people of the Felder, Silverman, and Vark models, and the oral, all the things dealing with language, dealing with analysis and reflection on an experience. These are going to all be things that are dealt with in the left brain. So thinkers that are dominant in these processes are probably also left brain dominant. But at the same time, we also have thinkers that are dealing with a lot of right brain processes. This is where you have that holistic random processing, the big picture, the concrete processing through the senses and the actual experiencing itself, and the nonverbal processing. So these are going to be your concrete, active thinkers, the people that are going to actually want to do it and to get their hands in it and to figure it out. These are going to be your visual people and your global thinkers, the people that are, acting and sensing and experiencing. This is all part of our right brain functioning. And there's just a couple things to remember with hemispheric dominance. Remember that there's interaction between the right and the left brain, so that just because an individual is functioning with one dominance or the other doesn't mean that they're solely functioning with one or the other of the right brain or left brain. That a lot of the times individuals have strengths of the right brain and of the left brain, and so we'll be seeing a crossover between the two. Also, it's helpful to know the origin of these different learning style preferences and strengths, so that one knows the characteristics that strength is operating by. So, being able to identify when a left brain procedure is happening versus a right brain procedure, and in our teaching also, making sure that we're using a nice combination of procedures that are going to be engaging the left brain versus the right brain and the different strengths that people have in those areas. Finally, in relation to the multiple intelligence theory, I think it's interesting that we can kind of couple somebody's learning style preferences with their individual intelligence capabilities and where we see them functioning at higher levels than others. And I think that there's a great interplay between the two. And if we look, you can kind of see the sensory perception, the linguistic, the musical, the spatial, the kinesthetic. These are very closely related to the Vark model of the different senses. And so the way that somebody learns is probably also a way in which they have an intelligence in that area, and they'll be acting on that. So somebody that is linguistically focused learning is probably also somebody that is good at forming words and connections and thinking about words, and they could be a journalist or a writer, whereas somebody who is spatially oriented and visual type of person that needs to see things and diagrams and design is somebody that has potential for being a designer or an artist thing. And you can go on through the rest. And then environmentally speaking, we talked about different stimuli for environments. People like to be left alone or like to work in groups. Some people work really well talking ideas out or forming connections or working by themselves and reflecting and writing and writing papers. And so thinking about interpersonal versus intrapersonal and how they learn, which is also an indication of maybe some of their intelligence strength. So just to form some midpoint conclusions, we can see that the learning style models help us discover the types of learners that we have in our classroom, and that they show how students perceive the world, but also possibly showcase areas in which they personally excel. So seeing that connection between learning styles and the possible implications for the multiple intelligences theory and how there's an interplay between the two. And so this knowledge of learning styles and their relationship to individual intelligence strength has great implications for teaching and for learning in the modern music classroom. And this is where Doug is going to take it and show a little bit more of the specific implications for learning styles and teaching styles, especially the teaching styles, and how we can implement teaching students of different strengths in these models, as well as showing some of the ideas around the multiple intelligences theory, specifically at the middle level, where there's really a transition point where people are coming into their own and figuring out what they like and what they want to do, and then more specifically how to apply this to music. And he'll show an example of music memorization and showing how learning styles and intelligence styles can specifically relate to how people learn in a music classroom and how they obtain music information.
So what we want to talk about first here is the concept of learning and teaching styles, really from the standpoint of should they, can they be matched together. Most teachers really are able to respond to differences in learning styles, and that ends up being much more preferable than trying to do it the other way around, which would be to match students with the teachers. Now, there are certain students that achieve only through selected methods that unfortunately in the long run frequently fail to produce academic results for other students. But those who were successful with a particular method or set of materials essentially have the same similar characteristics, similar personality traits. So when they're taught through methods that complement their learning characteristics, students at all levels, all ages, they become not only increasingly motivated, but they also achieve better academically. So even though authors will use different terms to describe student traits, they will tend to agree on the basic elements that constitute one's learning style. And that really brings us to Dunn and Dunn, who came up with a whopping 21 set of elements that deal with learning styles. Tory touched on this earlier, through such stimuli as environmental, emotional, sociological, physiological. So with that, Dunn and Dunn's 21 learning elements, we're going to start with the environmental elements. What they found is that individuals will respond uniquely to their environment, such as sound, light, temperature, and design. If we back up, if you think of sound, it could be that students learn best when there's absolutely absolute silence in the room, or it could be they need to have music playing in the background. There's a variety of possibilities in each one of these four environmental elements. If you move on to the sociological elements, now we're dealing with how do these students actually respond with other people, meaning do they work best when they're working alone, when they're working in pairs, with a group of peers, maybe with an actual team, a large group. Do they do better with an adult, or is it some combination of any of the above? Continuing with done and done, we move on to the physiological elements, and there's actually some really interesting statistics that go along with these elements. We're talking now about perceptual strengths, intake, the time of day can be extremely important, and also the need to be mobile or lack thereof. Some studies have proved that 20 to 30% of all people are considered auditory learners, meaning they learn and they remember based off of what they hear. There's another 40% that would be termed visual learners, and that leaves us with about 30 to 40% of people that can be termed kinesthetic tactual, visual tactual, or really any combination of the four senses. So the question that naturally comes up is that if 90% of all instruction is conducted through lecture or lecture discussion, then we really, how can we be surprised that there are so few students that achieve as well as maybe we believe they should, or even they believe they should? Moving on to the emotional elements, these are relatively straightforward. We're talking now about motivation, persistence, responsibility, and the need or lack thereof for structure. The motivated student, they'll need to be told what they're required to learn. They'll welcome praise, they'll welcome feedback, but really that stuff kind of happens once the assignment is completed. The challenging one, the unmotivated student, they need a lot of supervision. They need to be given shorter assignments so that it doesn't feel as overwhelming. And they're all for praise, but it needs to be authentic and it needs to happen as they're working on these assignments. From a structure standpoint, those who require specific directions, sequential tasks, or what have you, they'll tend to achieve well using programmed learning. The final set of elements are the psychological elements. These actually came along a little later for done and done, but nonetheless we're talking about global analytic, hemisphericity, or impulsive reflective. And to use those as an example, depending on the subject matter, you may use a reflective or impulsive approach. There are going to be some assignments that you'll really need to spend some time thinking about, organizing, but you'll be using what's termed your reflective strength. And there'll be other times that you're going to be more than confident, you're going to jump right into the deep end of the assignment. You're going to using that impulsive side of your learning. With all of those lovely elements in mind, we can move on to the teachers or the instructor's side of things and ask the question, how do teachers teach? Our supervisors, or our future supervisors in some cases, they'll observe faculty members in an attempt to evaluate and isolate the characteristics that really help create effective instruction. But there's some difficulties and problems with this approach. One is just accurately identifying common positive characteristics of teacher personality and style. Second, on a little more personal note, for the supervisors themselves, is obtaining objective interpretations of what's being observed. And then there's also incorrect assumptions about really what should be measured while they're observing. Finally, there's this lack of understanding that teachers, that while they may be knowledgeable, charismatic, hardworking, what have you, they still may not be effective with some students simply because their learning styles are not complemented by the teacher's styles, the teacher's teaching styles. There's a great quote that kind of sums up this whole section from Dunning-Geiser. Many people can learn things that are easy for them without using their learning styles, but all people can learn new and difficult information better when they capitalize on their styles. So continuing along with the idea of, or the question really, of how do teachers teach? Do they teach the way they were taught? Do they teach the way they learned? Sometimes you run into instructors that tend to believe that their way of doing things is the easy way or the right way to get things done. So the concept of teaching style then really corresponds to how each person learned. So we can modify our teaching approach, but it only can occur if the instructor understands why being the operative word, why one teaching style just can't be effective with every single student. Dunn and Dunn also throw out the idea of the 9 elements of teaching style. They'll preface it by saying that instructors, teachers, they all have preferences as to the type of classroom they want, even so far as the type of students they'd like. In some cases, teachers would prefer to have students whose learning styles are exactly opposite from the way they learned. But nonetheless, Dunn and Dunn start talking about the 9 elements that make up a person's teaching style. The first 2, educational philosophy and student preferences, really aren't observable by any means. However, the rest of them, instructional planning, the way students are grouped, even so far as the room design, the teaching environment, the teaching characteristics, the teacher's methods, and finally evaluation techniques. All 9 of these create, according to the Dunns, a teacher's actual teaching style. So with all of that said about the 9 elements of teaching, the 21 types of learning styles, we need to move on to the concept of teachers adapting to these different learning styles. And I guess the most important question that we want to ask is it realistic? Matching teachers with students does have some challenges, one of which is that the learning styles and the teaching styles, the characteristics, they don't necessarily group well, or at least they don't always cluster into the neatest of packages. Secondly, students and teachers really aren't consistent one way or the other in their learning or teaching styles, which I'm not so sure that that's necessarily a disadvantage. I think it's a good thing. But ultimately, if teachers can adapt their instruction techniques, they can ultimately become more effective with students, and it's in that way that they can provide a more of a caring, a more nurturing atmosphere in the classroom for their students. The next example we'd like to look at concerns multiple intelligences at the middle level, the middle school level. Traditional societies generally release 13-year-olds straight into adulthood through some rite of passage. However, in the United States, that's really not necessarily the case, leading us into the always confusing adolescent years where kids are trying to figure out who they are, what their interests are, where they're headed, you name it, they're in limbo. In our society, we ultimately suspend adolescence for years between what Simmons terms childish indulgence and adult responsibility. So the key for us as teachers is to capitalize on the energy these students have to make any subject. The example that we're ultimately going to use actually deals with art class. But the key is to capitalize on this energy and make whatever subject an opportunity for students to achieve mastery and self-respect. The question then is, how can success be achieved when we have students of all types of learning abilities? And that brings us back to Guru Gardner. As Tory was mentioning before in her report, everybody has his or her own unique multiple intelligences profile, whether that deals with the linguistic, the logical, mathematical, musical, spatial, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, or naturalist. So we're going to look at one 6th grade teacher's approach to multiple intelligences. In particular, this is a 6th grade teacher out of Massachusetts. One of his units that he designed dealt with science, literature, and creative writing. It involved a section elevation drawing of an invented cave, and that illustrated a story that the kids were writing about a cave adventure. This all followed a spelunking trip to a nearby cave. They also read Tom Sawyer, and they studied a unit on geology. From there, he moved on to a math and social studies unit where the students dealt with inventing a family, portrait drawings, handmade artifacts. They wrote biographies of family members. They even designed a floor plan of their supposed family home. A final unit that he used, there were pairs of students research, design, and they constructed 3-dimensional models of a public institution. And for that project, the students had to actually write letters to these businesses that were relevant to their project. They ultimately would visit the sites, they'd take notes, and every once in a while they'd call in an expert, like a pilot, to help them lay out a runway. Again, this is just one 6th grade teacher's approach to multiple intelligences. And now we're moving on to the actual art class example that I was talking about earlier. This is a multiple intelligences unit structure framework, and if you move past number 1, which is simply identifying the task, you'll see in number 2 and 3 in particular that this is showing how the teacher intends to use the multiple intelligence concepts in the lesson plan. And then we'll discuss a little bit more when I show you the filled in version of this in a second. And now this is the filled in version of this multiple intelligence unit structure framework. If you look at number 2, there's references to the use of the student's bodily kinesthetic intelligence, logical mathematical intelligence, and also spatial. And if you move down in particular to number 4, which probably for the purpose of what Tory and I are talking about is the opportunity for the teacher to reflect on how this actual unit came together, giving them a chance to identify the strengths and the weaknesses and potentially some of the changes they might make if they were to do this unit again. So what's the end result in all of this? An MI-based curriculum ultimately can broaden the scope of successful learning, and it can do that by tapping into students' different strengths, their interests, their background. We were talking about motivation before. This can promote educational equity while at the same time encouraging individualization. As a final wrap-up to this section, we would like to present this wonderful chart. I really can't take too much credit for this. Tory found this one, so she definitely rules the world on this. But this, we both thought this was just an excellent chart. It's so helpful for gearing activities to the learning styles and multiple intelligences. There are really, if you take some time to look at this chart, there are some wonderful examples here that teachers can use to help their students learn over many different styles. As a final example, I wanted to bring the learning styles, teaching styles into our world of music in a way that we actually use it from a practical point in performance, and that is through a theoretical model behind music memorization. Memorization, according to this theory, comes about from it's a sum basically of preview, practice, and overlearning. The preview stage in particular deals with notational, oral, and a performance overview. The practice stage deals with notational practice and conscious memorization. And then finally we have the overlearning stage, which is relearning, and then a concept called automatization, and then also maintenance rehearsal. Memorization in general is grouped into stages, and that goes from the standpoint of oral, visual, kinesthetic, and analytical stages. And if we think back to the VARC learning theory that Tory brought up earlier in the presentation, it deals its focus is also on the visual, oral, the reading and writing aspect, as well as the kinesthetic. All 4 of these stages from a memorization point of view are divided up, and they're grouped into sensory learning styles, the oral, the visual, the kinesthetic, and also the analytical learning styles. Included in that are 4 processing strategies, which are the holistic, serial, additive, and segmented. And again, tying this back to the VARC learning theory, which also deals with sensory perception. So when we move on to talking about sensory learning styles, we're really dealing with oral memory, the ability to hear the notes of a piece of music in the proper order without relying on a sound source or notational cue. Visual memory is recalling a mental picture of musical notation, either as a whole or in parts. If you're an instrumentalist, then you're talking about visualizing finger patterns or hand positions on whatever instrument you might be playing. The kinesthetic memory is the retention of the muscular movements involved in performing a piece of music. And this really deals with not just instrumentalists but vocalists as well. Individual learning preferences, or the type of music that you're performing, that has a large effect on the choice of one's learning style. There's been preliminary evidence that suggests that these sensory strategies might be based on an individual's learning style. And then when they've come around to asking most musicians about their approach, most musicians have really advocated using a combination of sensory strategies to strengthen their memory. From there, we go right into analytical learning styles. Analytical memory requires the cognitive interpretation of patterns and repetitions in a musical work. The focus here is on forming relationships and finding familiar patterns. Various techniques commonly are used when memorizing music. So instrumentalists, for example, may play their hands separately, learn the right hand first, learn the left hand first. Vocalists may rehearse at a slower tempo, and that goes for instrumentalists as well. Or potentially they'll rehearse segments of pieces in reverse order. Ultimately, to achieve this memorized performance, all of the previously mentioned processing strategies, learning styles can be used in various combinations and possibly to a differing degree of efficiency. In particular, I'm bringing back some of the terms that Tory used when she was mentioning the Kolb and the Gregoric theories, the diverger, the assimilator, just to give you a concept of how it all ties together and the different ways, or the different terminology and the ways we can experience processing. The one aspect that I did want to spend just a little bit of time on with this slide, when it came to the stages, was not the preview or the practice, but the overlearning stage, because sometimes this has a tendency to potentially confuse people. Alternate learning strategies and procedures might be utilized to strengthen memory and provide additional or alternative retrieval clues. We're talking about a stage now where the music has been learned, it's been practiced, and now we're at a point of fine-tuning things. For some people, it may take 7 rehearsals to feel as though they've memorized a piece. For some, it may be 17. For some, it may be 27. But the idea of this maintenance rehearsal is the periodic performance of a piece that keeps the information active in our brains and in our memory over a long period of time. And then finally is this concept of automatization. It is the extended and consistent repetition of a behavioral sequence, which will ultimately result in, and you have to be careful with how this is worded, but it comes out to be a routinized, stereotyped, inflexible performance that is completed automatically with no conscience. It's kind of robotic, but we still even need to be careful. The way I look at automatization is from the concept of piano pieces that I learned when I was 12 or 13 years old, and I'm in my 40s now, and I can still sit down and play those as though I was just learning them yesterday. As a final means of discussing appreciating the differences in learning and teaching styles, I'm going to leave you with a 4-minute scene, a really fantastic scene from Mr. Hollands' Opus. If you don't know the story, the quick 30-second version is Mr. Holland gets into the teaching profession in a rather reluctant style, and he's pretty bad at it at first. Doesn't really know how to relate to his kids, to his students rather, and is frustrated with their inability to learn and his inability to get his point across. He comes across a clarinet player who really wants to be very good, and he struggles trying to teach her. She struggles trying to learn until we get to this 4-minute scene where both characters make an amazing transformation.
Mr. Holland?
You're late. And you left your clarinet here the other day.
Yeah, if you know anyone who wants it. Well, I'm giving up the clarinet. I'm just goofing everybody else up anyway. So, I just wanted to say thanks. Thanks for trying.
Is it any fun?
I wanted it to be.
You know what we've been doing wrong, Miss Lang? We've been playing the notes on the page.
Well, what else is there to play?
Well, a lot more to music than notes on a page. These guys, for example. Now, they can't sing, and they have absolutely no harmonic sense, and they're playing the same 3 chords over and over again. And I love it. Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why?
I don't know.
Yeah, you do.
Because it's fun?
That's right. Because playing music is supposed to be fun. It's about heart. It's about feelings and moving people and something beautiful and being alive, and it's not about notes on a page. I could teach you notes on a page. I can't teach you that other stuff. Do me a favor. Pick up your clarinet and play with me.
Okay.
And this time, no music.
Oh.
Because you already know it. It's already in your head and your fingers and your heart. You just don't trust yourself to know that. Okay. Here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's do it again. And this time not so much lip on the mouthpiece.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh.
All right, no, don't do that. Let me ask you a question.
What?
When you look in the mirror, what do you like best about yourself?
My hair?
Why?
My father always says that it reminds him of a sunset.
Play the sunset. Close your eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't stop playing.
To conclude our presentation, we bring back one of the slides from the very beginning of the presentation and ask the question again of why we care. And after viewing the presentation, the first quote in particular really seems to stand out. When we share the profile of learning styles, as well as our own learning style information, the students see that not all individuals learn in the same way. Through the various information we've been able to present with graphs and charts and video, it's easy to see why this information is important for both the teacher and the student. We hope you've enjoyed this PowerPoint presentation on learning styles, teaching styles, multiple intelligences, and the modern classroom.